Hey guys, welcome to the Get in the Fight podcast. I'm your host, Nate Whitson. So glad to have you here with us today. Our real goal is to help Christian men in particular to be the men that God meant for them to be. And we're trying to strengthen Christian men to be better husbands and better fathers and better followers of Jesus. And a lot of our focus, I work full time as a financial advisor, but I'm also a sexual addiction recovery coach. And I spend a lot of time helping Christian men deal with pornography and apathy and complacency in life and have just a real passion for marriage and family. And so a lot of these things kind of mix and match here. And we're looking for ways to help men deal with these real life issues and become better men, better followers of Christ. And so as a result of that, my goal in the show is to bring on different guests and have different conversations that help us in one of those areas. How do we be better men, better fathers, better husbands? And today's special guest with me is Paul Byerly from the Marriage Bed Ministry. It's a marriage and sex ministry for Christian couples built on biblical wisdom. And he co-leads that with his wife, Lori. I've asked Paul to join and just kind of like, doing the internet sleuthing and finding people that align with biblical wisdom and passion for marriage and sex and just conversations that I think people aren't having enough of. I've come across the Marriage Bed Ministry and really love what I see and really excited to have Paul in. So, Paul, thank you for joining and being with us today in the show.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be great. I want to jump right in and pick your brain about different things along the way here. But on your website, there's a section that introduces your stories, and it's really quite powerful. I wonder if you could just kind of recap a little bit about you and Lori and some of that story about how you've met, your past before your marriage, and like how you ended up in ministry like this together.
Sure. We just celebrated our 40th Ruby anniversary a couple months
Nice,
ago.
nice, congrats.
So we have succeeded. When we got married, there were people betting we wouldn't. I think there was a pool. I never found that out officially, how long we'd last. And they had good reason. I mean, we had all kinds of messes coming in to our marriage. What really caused problems for us was sexually. I had been involved in porn. I was not looking at porn anymore. I realized later I was still affected by it, sort of the dry alcoholic type thing.
Yep.
But I had gotten out of porn. I'd been out of porn for almost a decade. We got married. Lori had been molested as a child, raped in college. So
Mm,
basically, she was covered in gasoline and I was a lit match, and it was not a
mm,
good thing. Um, Sex became a problem on the honeymoon. Didn't get better for the first couple of years. I mistakenly thought that was our only problem. It was the big problem. It was, the one that was screaming at us. There were other problems which we didn't deal with because obviously sex was the problem. I also thought,
mm.
well, the problem is her, not me, which again was incorrect. This was back in the 80s and the church didn't talk about sex. I'm not even sure the church acknowledged sex back in the 80s.
Yeah.
So we could not find help in the body of Christ. We
Mm,
tried and there was nobody. So there were one or two books back then about sex. LaHaye had a book, The Act of Marriage, and I think Celebration of Sex came out somewhere in there. We read those. We read our Bibles. We prayed. We cried. And by the grace of God, and only with his help, we got to a point where things started to improve.
mm.
And somewhere in that whole process, we said, God, if you'll help us get this right, we will help others. And a few years later, he kind of tapped us in the shoulder and gave us the opportunity to do that.
Mm, amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And I mean, what a story, like the way you describe it so well, she's drenched in gasoline and you're the match. And, even at the honeymoon, you mentioned it didn't go well. What was it that first caught your attention? Like, oh, wow, we're in trouble here.
Well, part of it, I have to confess, we became sexually active shortly before rather than shortly after the
Mm,
wedding. Um, that obviously became a problem later.
gotcha.
It wasn't a natural setting for sex, and we weren't dealing with it the way we would once we got married. So things changed pretty rapidly once we got married. Just her willingness and even ability to have sex just became next to zero. I mean,
Mm,
sex was difficult. It was painful. It was scary, um, which I now understand. At the time, I didn't understand.
yep.
And so, there was very little sex. There was a lot of fighting about sex. When we had it, it was not always good.
Yeah. How did it turn around? Like, maybe walk us through that journey. Like, where do things begin to change, and what was maybe the catalyst for that?
about 2 years marriage, we just decided this has got to change. This is horrible. We were a mess. We were hurting. We were, not happy. And so it was the prayer. It was the, seeking God. A lot of it was dealing with her past, her dealing with the pain, the
Yeah.
frustration, and the hurt from the things that had happened to her. As I said, I was free of porn, but I wasn't free of porn. It was still, up here.
Yeah.
My thinking about my expectations. And of course, I grew up on magazines as opposed to the videos of their day. So it wasn't as significant,
Yeah.
but still my expectations about what sex was, how it would happen were definitely pornified. And so I was dealing with that, getting a healthier understanding of what sex should look like. And she was doing the same, getting a healthier understanding of what sex should be like. And slowly we moved close enough together that we were able to begin having a functional sex life.
Mm.
I'd say by 5 years, we were really in a good place. I mean, there was a good 3 years in there. It was obviously improved during that time, but there were several years during which we struggled to get to something that we thought was okay. And then
Yeah.
since then, it's just gotten better and better, every aspect of our marriage.
Yeah. That's great. I know I talk to a lot of men who feel like they're just at a disconnect with their wife, and they just really feel very much like, where do we go and how do we deal with this difference? And a lot of times I think they're talking sex drive in particular. And sometimes there's more to it, the trauma and the abuse in some cases, the stories that are behind it that are just they're unspoken. Like, what do you say to that couple who just feels like they're missing each other and they just are like, I don't know where we go from here.
I get a lot of guys who think the only thing wrong with their marriage is sex. And that's been wrong all but a couple of times. I've had one or two couples where that really was the situation. And that's beautiful because it's easy.
Yeah.
Uh, Usually there's something else going on. Having been raped, something like that is obviously a problem. But
Hmm.
our society is not nice to women sexually. As far as I'm concerned, every woman has been in some way sexually abused by the age of 18, even if she's never been touched. Just our society is abusive. So women are coming into marriage sexually damaged.
Mm.
Generally, a couple gets married and the woman is, like, okay, I'm willing to wade into the deep end, and he's already, diving into, she's willing to wade into the shallow end.
Yeah.
He's already jumping into the deep end. And so
Yeah.
that difference, then he's frustrated because she's not where he is. She's frustrated because she feels he's pushing her hard, and that just continues.
Yeah.
It's usually not addressed in a marriage, and so it's not fixed in any way. And they settle into whatever broken routine they can
Mhm.
manage.
That's right. That's right.
But usually, it's more than just sex. For women, most women need a good, healthy, romantic relationship, intimate relationship in order to want and enjoy sex. And so if you're not providing that for your wife, then she doesn't have any interest. We talk about desire differences, and I think the vast majority of the time, it's not that the woman doesn't desire sex. She's not in a relationship that allows her to desire sex.
Mm.
And sometimes, often, in fact, if you can deal with that, if you can start addressing those lacks, then all of a sudden she's more willing and things start to change.
Mm. That's really interesting. Yeah, I recently, earlier this year, released my first book called Let's Talk About Sex. And it was 20 things that Christian husbands and wives wish their spouse knew or would do, but don't know how to
Mm.
tell you. And the lady that I co-wrote it with really dealt with it from the woman's perspective and really talked about, like, kind of like point after point in the very beginning from the woman's side that I wish my husband knew more was, I'm an emotional person. Like, I need more than what you're recognizing. Like, you're grabbing my butt, spanking
Correct.
me on the way around, doing things that might appeal to you, but you're missing me. And you're doing the same thing. Like, what are some of those things? Talk to the men listening to this show today about, like, what do they not get that a woman needs to know, their wife might need to know, that could make all the difference here?
Emotional connection. And that requires spending time together. That's talking, that's doing whatever. I mean, what you do isn't as important as the fact you're doing something together and enjoying it. That creates that emotional connection. And then non-sexual physical connection. If every time you touch your wife, you're trying to initiate sex and you're being sexual, that starts feeling weird to her.
Mm.
And the problem here is we're guys, and it's like, I snuggle up next to her and that arouses, especially if we haven't had sex in a few days. And so there's this push and pull going on where what I want, what I legitimately need is pushing at me to go in a direction that she's not ready to go yet. And so there's a
Mm,
lot of self-control involved
yeah.
here, in getting past that and reaching that relationship that she needs to be sexual.
Mm. Yeah, I think we miss that a lot as men. We're just trying to think. I think we're assuming a lot that she must clearly want it like I want it,
Mhm.
and we think like men, and we don't really think like she thinks. And until we learn to understand where she's coming from, I think we're going to continue to miss the point there, that emotional connection. We feel emotionally connected when we have sex with her,
Exactly.
right?
Women don't understand that. I know we're not really talking to women here, but that's one of the issues I try and work with women is that's how he feels emotionally connected. Don't engage in that. You're cutting off the avenue to what it is you want. And then
That's right.
it's the reverse of what we're
That's right. There's so much of like where I just see like where Christ's wisdom of like dying to self in
doing.
marriage. You what you want is the pathway to what you want as a man and as a woman is to surrender and to die to you and to say, okay, this is what is important to my wife. I'm going to serve her that way for the sake of love. And if I
Yeah.
would do that, then she will, if she's a good-willed woman, and that's why you married her because you assume that she is, then in that healthy relationship, she is gonna be drawn to you in that way. But
Sure.
when you try to manipulate it, we get into all kinds of trouble.
And the legitimate problem is we generally have a strong sex drive and it screams at us.
Yep.
You know, it's like our body, and our minds are pushing for that. And it's really hard to look past that and see what we need to do. And that is where the dying to self comes in. So
Absolutely. Hey guys, I wanted to take a quick break from the show to share with you 3 things that I think could help you to become more of the man that God meant for you to be: a better husband, a better father, and a better follower of Jesus Christ. 3 things totally free that I think can help you. Number 1 is our podcast. Hit the subscribe button, share them with a friend. That makes a big difference, not only in your life, but in somebody else that you care about as well. And it helps us to reach more men. Number 2, we do a free weekly newsletter that is short, it's concise, it deals with just one key question and then 3 simple action items each week that will help you to get in the fight in a really practical way. You can find that at getinthefight.club/newsletter. And then lastly, you can join our Fight Club community. This is a free private app for Christian men only, where you can talk to guys and get involved with guys' lives from all around the world who are just like you, trying to get in the fight to be better men for Christ. You get things like daily devos, weekly challenges, monthly gatherings, small groups, so much more. It's kind of like a Facebook group, but exclusively for Christian men, and it's totally awesome and it's totally free. Getinthefight.club/join and check it out. Get more today. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, get our newsletter, get involved in our Fight Club. Totally free things to help you to get in the fight and win today. All right, that's it for now. Thanks for listening. Back to the show. Well, one of the things again, in my book and just ministry in general, that I'm really shooting for is to try to get men and women to talk about sex. And you had mentioned this in the 80s that the church just doesn't really address. I think this is such a huge issue. Like, not only do we not talk about sex, when we do, we're just like, look, control yourself, or when you get married, it'll take care of itself, and leave it at that. And, I had a conversation with a guy today who just really kind of came out of disclosing to his wife his porn addiction of 20 some years and just starting to walk through it today. Right. And so we're kind of like just working through this journey of like, how does he respond to her, and well, all these things. What one of the things I was trying to give him a picture of, though, is like, when you get past this, what's next? What's the beautiful part of this? And the beautiful part of this is that now that this secret is out, this thing that you haven't told anybody for 20 years, you have the potential now to talk about anything with your wife. How do you guys in your counseling and in your ministry get husbands and wives to really learn to talk honestly and vulnerably about their wishes and desires and wants and all of that? What are some of the things that you guys suggest?
You've hit part of it is the secret. If you've got a secret, doesn't matter what it is. If you're withholding something from your spouse out of fear, or I get the guy though. If she learns about this, she'll leave me, so I can't tell her
Yep.
I'm looking at porn or I had an affair or whatever the situation is.
Yep.
And then he's trapped. He is unable to engage her emotionally the way she needs because he can't share his secret. And women are in the same place. I mean, you get women who have some sort of sexual abuse in their past and have not told their husband about that.
Yep.
And that's absolutely crippling the relationship and crippling her ability to talk. Trust is the issue. Can I trust my spouse? If I share this, are they going to belittle me? Are they going to attack me? Are they going to think badly of me? Or can I say anything? Can I
Mm,
be really naked? Because that's what it is. When you need
mhm.
emotion, to share everything.
Yeah. In your experience, when somebody breaks that barrier and they have the courage to have that hard conversation, to share the secret, or to just even express like, hey, I want more for us than what I'm experiencing. Has it been your experience that when a person breaks through that first barrier, that it leads to just a better marriage in general from there?
Usually the initial response is some sort of shock or disbelief or distance. If you just had a bombshell go off in your marriage, then you're going to react to that.
Yep.
And then the question is, how mature is the person who's received that information?
Mm,
Are they able to understand what's going on? Are they able to empathize with the pain and suffering their spouse has been going through? And when they can, then yes, there's a huge opening.
yep.
And usually there begins to be, back and forth. It's like I share my secret, which is huge. And then you're open to share your secrets, none of which are nearly as big, but it's still the two of us connecting on a deeper level.
That's right.
And sometimes, a little bit of help with that, some sort of coaching or counseling is necessary to make that work. Not always, but sometimes that's a good way to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, when you and Lori are doing coaching as part of your ministry, what do you find that most Christian men are coming to you for? Like, what are some of the common issues that are they're coming to you guys for, I guess?
It's heavily motivated by sexual frustration. That will be the one that will often get a man, being willing to go for help. A lot of us, I'm a guy, I don't do this kind of thing. I don't do emotions. I don't
Mhm.
talk to others, all that kind of stuff. That's not as bad as it was when I was younger, but there's still
Yeah.
some of it out there. We all need some sort of pain that gets us to go for help. And for guys, very often that's going to be sexual. We also see guys just, it's like there is no connection in their marriage, not just a sexual issue, but just, we don't spend time together. We're not intimate
Mhm.
anymore. I get guys, well into the 40s or 50s. The kids are mostly grown now. She's no longer spending huge amounts of time and energy on the children, but she hasn't reinvested in the marriage. And it's
Yep.
wondering, do I ever get my wife back?
Mm. What about from women's standpoint? What is it that maybe men would need to know? What would be helpful for a guy to hear that women are coming to coaches like you and Lori for, that might like make us aware of what's happening with her?
Usually it's the lack of time together.
Okay.
He works all the time. We almost never see each other. All he wants is sex, that kind of thing. Although honestly, it's not uncommon for us to get a woman who says, I'm not getting enough sex.
Mhm.
The statistics put that at somewhere between 25 and 30% of marriages, the wife actually wants more. So we do get people coming for that. Just because of what we do, we don't see a lot of the things like alcoholism or drug addiction, gambling addiction. I know people who deal with those things. So that is
Mhm.
definitely out there, but that's not what we tend to get.
Yeah. So I guess like what would you say to men in terms of like, or maybe it's like this, like, you've been married for 40 years, which is so awesome. What is something that you wish you would have adopted sooner? Like, now that you know it now, like, what are some things that you wish you would have adopted in your marriage or in your sex life or in your communication in this thing? Like, what comes to mind for you?
You mentioned at the opening about, marrying someone who's goodwill, and I believe that, but my internal dialogue did not always reflect that.
Mm,
And I have learned, I actually will, when I get frustrated with Lori, which still happens after 40 years sometimes, I've got an internal dialogue. I'm arguing with myself, maybe the little angel and devil on the shoulder type thing. No, that's not who she is. That's not, she didn't mean to hurt you. She didn't know that hurt you. She was doing this, not that. And if I could have learned that earlier, a lot of
mm,
things, that I got, all hurt about and angry about sometimes for months could have been resolved without even really talking with her. Just this is not who she is. I know who she is. It's when I'm hurt and angry that then I tend to fall back on that other example, which of course has nothing to do with her. That has to do with my history. We talk about that a lot in coaching. Is you're not really mad at your husband, you're mad at your father, or you're mad at your mother, or all
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. So that,
Interesting. Yeah, I think that if nothing else, like that dialogue, I do want to go back to that. I just want to say, like, even that good-willed part, I had taken that. There was a local pastor here. He's much bigger than local now, but Emerson Eggerichs has a book called Love and Respect. If you're familiar with Emerson,
yes,
he's
absolutely.
okay, yeah, and he was a local pastor to here in the mid-Michigan area. But Emerson, that was one of the most helpful things in our premarital counseling was this idea that I married a woman who I genuinely believed was goodwill to me. So having to fight off the internal dialogue that you mentioned is so, so important. I'm really glad that you mentioned that because just because you hear it in your head doesn't mean it's true, and having to learn to fight back against that has saved us so many heartaches because a lot of it's just my own wrestling. She has no idea what's even going on. Right. And I think a lot of guys probably can relate with that.
Yeah.
What do you think, Paul? Like, what do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions that Christian couples have about sex and intimacy in marriage? What are some of the misconceptions that you run across?
You touched on one of them earlier. We think that she's like us. She's got the same kind of drive, same kind of interest. And of course, the world's pushing that. I mean, the world
Yeah.
has got this dialogue that, the only difference between me and my wife is some minor plumbing differences. And that is absolutely wrong. I've done a lot of
Yeah.
study, of biology, and differences in our brains are far more significant than the difference in our bodies. When we're in utero, males are exposed to testosterone. That changes our bodies. It, gives us a penis and testicles, but it also has significant impact in our brains, the way our brains are connected, which parts are larger. We think and feel different.
Mhm.
And that extends radically to our sexuality. And so that becomes a huge problem because she expects him to be like her. He expects her to be like him. They're nothing alike.
Yep.
And so we have very much masculinized sexuality. If you look at porn,
Right.
if you've looked at porn, most of those women have got a male template pasted over. They are ready to have sex at the drop of a hat with any guy. They're aroused by what they see.
Yep.
A couple kisses and they're ready. Orgasming left and right from things that no real woman even wants to do, much less can enjoy.
That's right.
And so, unfortunately, now especially with the video porn, I mean, I'm sure you're aware, a lot of guys come into marriage and they've got 1,000+ hours of video porn stored
Yep.
in their brain.
That's right.
And they expect their wife to be like all those porn actresses. And she can't be, doesn't want to be, won't enjoy being that.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And you talk about like a misconception in marriage. It's like when you come in with that in your brain of this is what I think it's going to be like. Oh, the disappointment, the frustration of unmet expectations. Right. And she's got a completely different picture. Right. And you mentioned it kind of like wading into the pool and we're in the deep end here when it comes to this. The frustration that comes is immense. Right. And now you start a marriage off with bitterness.
Another common thing I know from doing premarital, the vast majority of couples are engaged in sex before they get married. The
Yeah.
majority are having intercourse. Most of the ones who aren't doing that are doing everything but. And
Yep.
that's in the church.
That's right.
That is the norm. I'm not approving of that or saying it's okay, but that is the norm. I did the same thing myself, so I hardly throw rocks at that. The problem is, more often than not, the woman either doesn't want to be doing that or has gone past what she's really comfortable with.
Hmm.
And we've talked to women who, basically they believe that having sex is the price of admission.
Yeah.
If you want to get dates, if you want to get a guy to ask you to marry him, you have to have sex.
Mm.
And that's not a healthy atmosphere to be having sex. You don't say no when you don't want it because you have to do it. You
Mm.
don't say no to that act that you find gross because you're expected to do it.
Yep.
And then the couple gets married and the wife thinks, okay, now I'm married, we're into the marriage and now I can say no when I don't feel like it. I can say no to the acts I don't want. And then the guy's screaming bait and switch.
Yep.
And
That's
we
right.
deal with that all the time. It's extremely common.
Yeah. That makes so much sense. You had mentioned earlier, like the percentage of women that are saying, that they're mismatched with their spouse. That's very interesting, right? Where women are saying like, he's just not interested. And I think
Right.
again, one of the things that's likely is that he has been so saturated with visual images or is currently looking at different things or engaging in fantasy of some kind that he's not interested in the real thing. I think
Right.
like the study of pornography and how it affects real life in-person relationships is shocking to most people when
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
hear it. Is that kind of your experience too, that when that happens, a lot of times the man is in a lot of ways dealing in fantasy world somewhere?
That's very common, but that's the majority of it, I'd say. But we've also dealt with guys who were so beat up by purity culture. And of course, when that was big and where we are now, we're getting a lot of couples, been married a few years to a decade, but he just got buried with purity culture. I mean, I've talked
Mhm.
to a couple guys who say, I never masturbated growing up because I was so terrified of it or been so, made afraid of it or whatever it was that was
Yep.
just in their heads. And
Yep.
so they come into marriage with almost no sexual function. And then of course they can't just turn it off, that they've been convinced sex is bad.
Yeah.
That's a minority. The porn is more commonly the issue, but yeah, whatever the brokenness is, they don't want to engage in sex or it's painful for them or they can't get what they want sexually. I mean, you've got the guy who's masturbating to porn or he's given up porn, but he's masturbating to his porn thoughts because his wife won't do the things that he wants.
Yep. Yep. It just so broken.
Yeah.
Um,
I, funny story.
yeah.
Years ago, we were working with a couple and we were having dinner with them. We went out, I think we went out to get ice or something, he and I, and he tells me he would really like to have sex behind, not anal sex, just sex behind. But he's
Yep.
convinced his wife would be deeply offended that he'd suggested this. Well, it turns out at the same time, my wife was with her wife. They were working on the dinner. And she mentioned she'd really like it, do it that way, but she knows that he'd be offended. We talk you know, after we were together with them. And then, we sort of nudged them. Hey, you've both expressed an interest in this, get over yourselves. And so they did. And it was just, it
Yeah.
was the sad humor of they both want this thing and they're both convinced the other will be offended because somehow this is not a Christian way of having sex.
Amazing.
So the
Isn't that
lack of
amazing?
communication can be dangerous.
Yeah. Yeah. Like that's such a big part of what we try to do here is just like create conversations so they can talk about it because sometimes it's as simple as that story just right there. Like,
Mhm.
oh my gosh, you're interested too. I had no idea. And this whole time, they've just lived without and felt bitterness or disconnect for something that totally could have been
Right.
solved by literally talking about it.
Yeah. Or they're lusting, or they actually end up, going to porn or having an affair because I can't get this thing from my spouse. And turns out he's just willing.
That's right. That's right. Learning to talk about sex is so critical. I think throughout the stages too, I've been married for about 20 years, 21 maybe this year, catching up to you all the time here, Paul. But,
Congratulations.
yeah, no, it's great, and I think, like, what's amazing is sex continues to get better, and it's not always the story, but it ought to be, I think, for Christian couples, but I don't know that we know how to do that. Like, what are some things you would say to the couple that's doing well, but they're starting to fade there? Like, I'll give you an example. We had somebody recently who had told my wife the wife had told my wife, like, "I'm not really sure what sex after 50 is even for, like, why are we still worrying about this?" And it just kinda, breaks your heart when you're the way we are, that you and I are. I wanna help these couples, like, continue to grow, continue to get closer. Like, what do you say to that couple who is maybe 20, 30 years into their marriage? How do they keep getting better?
Part of the problem, you get the women, they hit menopause. It's like, well, I don't know why I'm having sex anymore. And the reality is they were never really enjoying it. And this
Mhm.
is one of the misconceptions of men, well, my wife had an orgasm, so sex was for. That's not the case. There are times women have orgasms that they really didn't want to have. They really didn't care. Maybe they showed up for him and they were okay with that. And the orgasm happened just because their bodies work and they almost feel, frustrated that it did because it sort of feels like their body is almost moving against them. And then there are times that women, some women don't always orgasm and are fine with it. Most guys can't comprehend that, but it's like they enjoy what's going on. Occasionally if sex is just him climaxing, that's fine with it. So we
Mhm.
misunderstand what makes sex good for a woman. And we often assume, well, she's climaxing, 80% of the time. So clearly she's enjoying sex. maybe she's not. Because
Yeah.
if she's not getting what she needs emotionally, not outside of the sex, within sex, is there an emotional connection there? When the couple gets done, does she feel connected to him? Is there that afterplay? If you've been doing it and not really enjoying it, and now you've hit menopause, then it's natural to say, why am I still doing this?
Yep.
So, the solution is to make sure sex is good before you get to that point. Now, if you've gotten to that place, then it's far more difficult, and we deal with that. And so that's kind of, you're going back to the basics. You're helping the husband understand what good sex looks like. Talk to his wife. What would she like sex to look like? How would it be good for her? Is he
Hmm.
doing things that she puts up with that she doesn't really enjoy? Are there different things that she would like that have never been part of your sexuality? Has she just been kind of going along for you? None
Yeah.
of those are healthy sexuality. None of those are going to carry her into, her 50s or 60s, still wanting to have sex.
Yeah. No, that's great. I know that in writing Let's Talk About Sex, one of the things that came out from women was how what percentage of women don't regularly orgasm, that it's such a small number comparatively, but they play along and they love their husbands and they're there, but they're not like, they don't just love it, you know? And then, so then the idea of like introducing a conversation to say that they don't want to hurt their husband's feelings either. And so all of these unspoken things happen that, you know, she would do better if she actually enjoyed it more physically even, you know? And so just learning to talk to each other about like what works, what doesn't, what's really happening, can really change everything. And again, just learning to teach people to talk. Do you guys have any programs or courses or things that you guys use in particular that might be helpful in aiding these conversations or leading people here this way?
We like to use the image of a playground. Your sex life is a playground, and
Okay.
there's all the different things on the playground. There's a fence around the playground, and that's God's rules. God says you don't go outside this fence, but you can do everything inside the fence. And so, what about the monkey bars? And he says, I'd like to try that. And she's like, oh, that's terrifying. Okay, then you go over to the slide, do that. That's good fun. And through your marriage, you're going to try various things and go back to things. It's interesting. You get a couple, they'll try something, the third week of their marriage, and neither of them
Yeah.
really cares for it. And, 20 years later, they talk about it. They both kind of think, yeah, let's try that. And it becomes one of their favorite things.
Yeah.
Sexuality is an evolving thing. It changes with us. It changes as our bodies and our minds change, and you've got to continue to engage that. So, the playground is a tool for understanding there's a huge number of options out there. And how can you talk about that? How can you identify, yeah, I'm a little curious about this one. I'm not sure about that.
Hmm.
It's just a tool for beginning to have those discussions.
That's great. I love the analogy and the way that it's an easy way of talking about it to address some of the what if questions and how about this stuff that people struggle to get to. I think that's a perfect way to maybe break the barrier if you're not used to talking about sex out loud, with your spouse, to use the analogy. That's beautiful. Well, what would you say, I guess, Paul, to the guy who his wife is just like, look, I'm not interested. We're married, and is really kind of quite forcefully in some cases I can think of just saying, I'm not interested. Let's drop it. I don't want to talk about it. I do come across that. Like, how does that guy deal with that? Because he's going like, I'm not leaving.
Right.
I'm married. I'm Christian. I know divorce isn't even an option, but I feel so stuck. What do you say to that guy?
Generally, I encourage him to work on the marriage as a whole. Uh, Odds are he's not engaging his wife outside of sexuality in the way that she wants or needs.
Mm,
She may not even know that. She may not know why she's frustrated or why she's disconnected. And then it becomes, and I've had this discussion a number of times with guys who run through all the things. Are you having date nights? Do you go out for walks together? Do you play games together? Go through the whole litany. What did
yeah.
you used to do that you don't do anymore? And it's difficult because it's detective work and it's a whole lot of trial and error
Yeah.
until you hit on something that, oh, she kind of liked that. And we engaged, we had a fun time. And that doesn't mean you go home and have sex. That means you've begun to build, in my mind, a good marriage is the foundation upon which you build a sex life. And if you
Yes.
haven't got that foundation, you can't have a sex life. You can't have a
Mm,
good sex life. So you're working on that foundation so that you can then build something better on top of it. And let me say a word about just for him sex, which we all hate.
Hmm.
I mean, mercy sex, we call it that. I think mercy sex is a horrible term because some women, it's like, I truly love you. I know you're frustrated. I want to take care of this for you. That's not mercy. That's lust.
Yep.
So I think, repackaging it that way is a good thing. But the reality is when it's just for one, that's still a good thing because you're still having sex.
Yep.
It's taking care of some of the physical pressure on him, but it means the couple is continuing to have sex. She is continuing to be sexual. If you stop having sex for 2 years, the chances of you restarting your sex life are extremely low.
Yep.
So it's a good stop. It's not what any of us want. It's not the kind of sex we want. But
Yep.
sometimes as you're building that foundation, as you're working on the marriage, you need to, if she offers, don't say no.
Yep.
Take what is there and allow that to be part of your growing into something better.
Yeah, that even just makes me think, do you guys counsel to even schedule sex? I know some people will just be like, it just kind of feels forced in that, but it kind of
Yeah.
reminds me a little of what you're saying. What are your thoughts on scheduled sex?
Yeah. Some people react badly to that. Some do very well. A lot of people find that scheduling works, especially if they're very busy. The other one is think about when you have sex. And this is particularly true when you've got a couple where the kids are out of the house or they're out of the house a lot. Those nights they're out someplace. You don't have to have sex going to bed. In fact, especially as you get older, going to sex, having sex last thing in the evening, you're tired. Done.
Yep.
Can you, Saturday morning sex? Can you have, if you work from home, it's great. If you're retired, you've got the whole day out there.
Yep.
So I encourage couples to rethink when they have sex because that can make a huge difference.
So funny. I mean, that small little tweak, Paul, you're totally right because, it's amazing. It's the same, maybe even the same kind of acts, same even kind
Mm.
of place, but just at a different time of day for a guy, this can feel so different. It feels like a special kind of treat or whatever. So yeah, I love the idea there of just, thinking through that. It makes so much sense. Last question, just for time's sake here. It's been so great, Paul. If you could just give one piece of advice, I guess, to Christian husbands who just simply just want to strengthen their marriage, like what do you say to that guy? Just like, man, I want to get this right. How does he strengthen his marriage today?
Connect to your wife's heart. That's what she longs for. She desires that as much as you desire sexual intimacy. Do that and get it right, and everything else will fall into place. I know that
Yeah.
sounds like magic.
Yeah.
If you're 10 years, 20 years down the road and you haven't done that, then you have to do that right for a very long time to get it to make sense.
Yeah. That's so good. You had just mentioned it previously too, like the foundation of just like a strong, healthy marriage is what leads to a great sex life. And so if you
Mhm.
don't have that right, you got to go back to the foundation. And
Right.
that's her heart. That's her heart. Finding her heart, what moves her, how she wants to be talked to, how she wants to be treated, how she wants to be dated and loved and cared for. Like, who is she? How did God make her? Go find that out, solve that, and see if that doesn't help lead you to some of the things that you're looking for as a man. Such great stuff, Paul. I love what you guys are doing. Kind of tell everybody here as we wrap up, like a little bit more about your ministry, what you guys do, how they can connect with you, anything that you might have for them or things you're working on. Let us know. Tell the guys a little bit about you.
Yeah. We've been doing themarriagebed.com, all one word, since 1997. So yeah, it's been around 2 years.
Yeah.
That's got a lot of resources. That's primarily about the sexual aspects. I blog at doingmarriagewell.com, all one word again. Blog 5 days a week on that. So that's where I'm actively involved. You can connect with me there. We do our coaching through aldrichministries.com, and there are links on the websites to that.
Okay.
And so, it's a group that does coaching. If you request us, you'll probably get us, but there are other people there. If you've got needs that don't fit what we tend to do, they've got people that do story work, people who work with addiction, sexual addiction, pornography, that kind of thing. So there's some really good resources there.
That's awesome. Well, man, it's really neat to see how far the church has gone, capital C,
Yes.
from when we grew up and just sex was taboo to purity culture growing up in the 80s and 90s. I know for me, to what you guys are doing, you and Lawyer are doing, and how God's just really crafted this really cool ministry out of brokenness. This God is so masterful at taking like brokenness and then building stronger marriages from your story. I appreciate what you guys do and the messages you put out there, the love for Jesus, and then also just for family and all of that. So, man, we're just cheering for you from here. Really appreciate your time today. Man, we're going to just encourage you guys to check out themarriagebed.com and doingmarriagewell.com and all these things. We'll put a link to that at the
Good.
bottom of the show. But thank you so much for your time and all that you're doing.
Thank you for your part in this battle.
Absolutely. Yeah. To God be the glory for sure. Well, yeah, check out themarriagebed.com and Doing Marriage Well. Connect with Paul, Lori. They're doing great work there for the kingdom. And again, man, if there's just anything, I can just tell you, Paul just laid it out so well, but just like pursue the heart of your wife. If you're a man listening to this, pursue the heart of your wife and love her and treat her the way that she deserves to be loved and treated, and just see what comes about from there. But just start there, right? Pray for her, love her, treat her well. And man, we're hoping that today's conversation is going to help you to be a better husband and follower of Jesus. So thanks for joining the show. We'll see you in the next episode shortly. Hey guys, thanks so much for being here today and listening to the show. Please be sure to head over to the website at getinthefight.club. And before you go, if you haven't already, please subscribe, click the like button, and leave us a positive 5-star review. It makes a huge difference whenever you do. Have a great day. Go get in the fight.